Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to another round of the monthly Internet Governance Briefing by the Geneva Internet Platform. Today, obviously, we'll cover what has happened in October. Let me move straight to the first part of the webinar, which is what were the major trends that we identified in October. And this time, we have focused on two particular major trends. One is the decision of the agreement within the OECD, a club of mainly rich countries with a lot of partners, which have managed to come up to an agreement about taxes. We'll get into details of that, and we'll particularly cover what is the digital component of this agreement. The second trend that we identified is the USEU Trade and Technology Council, or discussion between the US and EU, which touch upon a number of very interesting digital issues. You might notice that we didn't put Facebook as one of the trends of the month, even though it is a huge buzz in the global media. The reason for that is not because it's not important, it is, and we'll cover it a little bit through the barometer part. But it is that Facebook is actually an example that we can use throughout discussions on major topics and other developments, which we will heavily use today. And by the way, I invite you to also reflect as a cross-cutting example. We invited our colleague and a senior researcher, Marilia Maciel, who will join us today to try to explain what has actually happened and why this is relevant and what we can expect and so on. So let me bring Marilia in, and let's maybe try to decode some of the major aspects. Marilia, welcome, and it's glad to have you with us.
When it comes to the OECD agreement, we know for many years now that there's a mismatch between the rapid growth of the digital economy and how and where taxes are being collected. The absence of a common solution to this problem has pushed several countries to engage in unilateral practices, such as deciding on taxing digital services through national law. And this made really clear that a common solution was needed, because this unilateral approach threatens to fragment the international tax system and creates a burden for companies that need to operate across jurisdictions that are applying different taxes. A solution to this problem has been cooking for some years now in the OECD. The OECD is discussing taxes in a broadened setting, which is developed in partnership with the G20 countries. They call this the Inclusive Framework on BEPS, Base Erosion and Profit Shifting. And the discussion has been ongoing for many years, as I mentioned. But it's really hard to reach an agreement, as we can imagine. And among the many issues that have been sticky points, countries that have applied throughout the years lower tax rates have opposed to an agreement. So what happened in October? What happened this month? And this month is a very important landmark, because 136 countries, they finally agreed on a tax that will bring about a major reform on the international tax system. And they finalized to agree the text of a statement on a two-pillar solution to address tax challenges arising from the digital economy. And they have also agreed on an implementation plan. This is a very important deal because it managed to bring on board, as I mentioned, countries that have been opposing changes in taxation, including Estonia, Ireland, Hungary, and these countries are now on board. According to the OECD, they represent more than 90% of global GDP. Therefore, is an agreement that has not only broad political, but also economic importance to the world.
So a very practical question, where will the money go? As the illustration behind me shows, how can we, particularly the users, how can we see where these taxes will actually end up?
So pillar one is concerned with how to distribute the profits from the companies in a more fair way. And in practice, what it means is that there will be a reallocation of profits from to markets where these companies operate, but they do not necessarily have a physical presence. And physical presence traditionally has been a very important criteria when it comes to applying taxes. We are talking about companies that make more than 20 billion euros. This covers companies such as Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, and so on. In addition to that, this will cover companies that make profitability above 10%. And this is companies that are highly profitable. And when they cross this 10% threshold, then 25% of what they have as profit will go into a common pool. And countries will have the right to apply to receive some money that has been placed in this common pool. A very complex calculation will take place to know how much countries will receive, but this formula will take into account not only economic activity, but also the GDP of the country. In general, the OECD estimates that 100 billion will be reallocated to different countries because of the new rules that have been put in place in Pillar 1. Pillar 2 is actually the one that we have been talking about more in the media. And what it aims is to ensure a healthier competition between countries when it comes to the taxation system. So according to Pillar 2, countries cannot apply less than 15% tax. We know that some countries have applied less than that, such as Ireland, for instance. That's why these countries have been very attractive to companies. But the baseline for all countries that are part of the agreement will be 15%. And the expectation of the OECD is to implement it in 2023. However, there are countries that are coming forward to say that this deadline is extremely tight. They expect to see some flexibility there. When it comes to Pillar 2, the OECD is going to set forth some guidelines for countries to regulate this in their national laws.
USEU Trade and Technology Council, which took place, there were negotiations and general framework of a number of issues, including semiconductors, AI, expert technologies, and so on. So with that, I'll bring my colleague Pavlina, who is also our representative in the US, in Washington, D.C., so probably best place to help us go into what actually happened during these negotiations. Pavlina, welcome on board. And maybe a quick question at the beginning. So what was this whole TTC about, and what came out in a summary?
At this time, with the TTC, the US and EU met on the 29th of September, and they agreed on a set of common principles in 10 key topics: standards for emerging technologies, green tech, securing supply chains, ICT security, data governance, misuse of technology, export controls, investment screening, and support for small and medium enterprises and global trade challenges. However, in the post-Pittsburgh statement, there are 5 issues which are so fast-tracked or will get more attention to start with. And these are the foreign investment screening, so both on the side of US and EU, the parties will do investment screening and exclude certain investments based on the national security in the United States concerns or public order concerns within the EU. So there are certain principles to such screenings as the non-discrimination, transparency, accountability, and the need for enforcement mechanisms. Another topic which was within these 5 fast-tracked ones is the use of AI and development of trustworthy AI. It is a little bit faced towards China because they say about creating AI which will support human rights and implementation, and that the technical solution need to ensure that the AI systems do not produce biased results. Then the third fast-track topic is semiconductors, which is very pressing both on EU side and on the US side. There is a shortage in semiconductors sector, and it will go through 2022 at least. So both sides are very concerned about this. They are trying to strengthen domestic supply supply chains for semiconductors without ending up in subsidy race, which might be a little tricky because both on domestic and within the US and within the EU, there are regulations and financial supports which are trying to boost the domestic side. But in any case, some experts say that both EU and US will struggle to find a common ground, and that is on China. It is the one who shall not be named within the TTC. It is not mentioned by name by any means, but it's referred as non-market economy. And when you read the TTC document, the joint statement, there are some references to China's most controversial practices, including forced technology transfers, subsidies, non-market activities of state-owned enterprises. But both, so on the US side, traditionally the relationship towards China is more controversial, while EU will try to, is less willing to be confrontational towards China, while the TTC doesn't say how often it should meet and such. It is expected that in the first quarter of 2022, there will be some kind of outcome. But in any case, like previously, the devil lies in details here. So the more the negotiations go on, the more detailed the discussions become, the more diverse the opinions are on the US and EU side on the subject matter. So it is a matter of seeing how far both sides are able to come together on a certain issue. Of course, with, for example, for semiconductors, there's a certain pressure to do so, unlike in some more wider topic like climate change and green tech, which was not fast-tracked.
How does it all play as a sort of a geopolitics of digital discussions? And Johan, we promised that we will bring in a bit of Facebook as an example throughout this, as a cross-cutting example.
In economic field, separate regulatory areas like trade, fiscal policy, competition policy, and now data are coming in closer proximity. We saw it already during the crisis in Greece, well, a few years ago, that you cannot have a clear division between, let's say, trade policy and fiscal policy. And I think that digitalization will accelerate need to at least synchronization, or if not even convergence or harmonization of these separate policy fields on national, regional, and global levels. Therefore, you cannot just regulate trade without having some fiscal regulation. But I would argue that there is a rapprochement via G20, because via OECD. One of the most controversial issues in the relation between US and EU was taxation of digital companies. And this is a big issue in Brussels, and there's been a big issue between two actors. And I would argue that it will bring more warmer digital policy relation between Washington and Brussels in particular. This is important development. I think we should highlight that. And that could be probably building block for more convergences in other areas, especially data and AI. AI, if you read a part of the TTC on AI, you just have this wording, each party acknowledge its own policies, and you can see that there is a difference. Therefore, this is important development. And third development related to Facebook, and also this fifth policy priority in TTC, social media, is also impact on the global policy making. If you go through Facebook policy papers, you will find a few echoing words. One is misinformation, focus mainly on the 6th of January, what's happened in DC, but also on the questions of misinformation in the context of the major conflicts. Traditionally, the case of Myanmar, but now Ethiopia, Middle East, and other places. Therefore, there will be increasing pressure, and that would be collateral impact of the Facebook crisis, which we are seeing, will be increasing pressure for some sort of content policy regulation. It is a very controversial issue, and it was usually was more let's say, China, Russia were arguing for that, but there is now more and more pressure coming from the developed countries for some sort of content policy. It was also highlighted in UN Secretary General statement during the UNGA and in his report, Our Common Agenda, that something has to be done with the case of misinformation. I would say this is going to be the major challenge for in particular EU, but to some extent the United States, how to protect its own interests, which are legitimate and important, while preserving integrated global economy and supply chains. That formula, in addition to tax formula, will be one of the key formula which in a way we will be negotiating in the months ahead or years ahead, I would say.
This month, we had a few topics that even popped up in the previous discussion on trends. Security was high, e-commerce naturally, and infrastructure due to one very significant development, as well as content policy. So let's go into all of these very briefly, because we already mentioned a lot of them. I remember writing this paragraph, and I know Pavlina can back me up on this, on the 12th of October saying, well, should Russia even be invited? Because consistently Russian officials have been saying, in our bilateral cyber talks, the US has been focusing on ransomware. Now, this is not something that Russia is particularly keen to talk about in specific details, because Russia also wants other topics on the agenda. Therefore, the point of inviting Russia to this initiative would be strict diplomacy, which already is happening bilaterally. As far as infrastructure goes, if you are on Facebook, WhatsApp or Instagram, you already know that they suffered major outage on the 4th of October. The reason is that they were locked out of their own apartment, so to say. This means that Facebook wasn't able to remotely access their own servers and services to solve the problem. They actually had to fly people out to California to physically sit down with the servers and routers and change what is known as the Border Gateway Protocol. These settings were the one that essentially messed up Facebook's connectivity. Now, there are 4 possible scenarios that led to Facebook's longest downtime ever, and these were a simple technical mistake, an insider reacting to the whistleblower's evidence, a cyber attack, or an intentional outage. We still don't know if any of these scenarios is correct. And finally, we move to content policy. Of course, Facebook has been in the media quite a lot. They haven't been having a good month. And what started off this month was that the whistleblower Frances Haugen came out to say that she was the one that gave the documents over to the Wall Street Journal. And she testified in Congress saying that Facebook cares more about profit than it cares about their users. She essentially accused the company of harming children's mental health and not disclosing this, as well as amplifying division, extremism, and polarization among their users. She called on Congress to take action and added that Facebook has this closed design, which means that it has no oversight, even from its own oversight board. This same whistleblower testified in the UK. And it was a testimony about Facebook's practices because the UK is currently working on an online safety bill. And what she said there is that regulators don't have a lot of time to curtail the spread of hateful and harmful content. Here's something that's even more interesting. Exactly 7 days before she testified, another Facebook whistleblower testified, but this is not someone who came out recently as with data. This woman came out even earlier. Her name is Sophie Zhang, and she also testified at the same subcommittee that is currently debating online safety bill. And if you thought that, you know, that's it, they have two whistleblowers, now there will be another one, because we have found out that another former Facebook employee is anonymously fielding a complaint against the company to the SEC. This happened on the 22nd of October, and according to media reports, they're also claiming that Facebook cares more about profit than their own users.
Important bit is that the next monthly briefing is obviously last Tuesday of the month again, and that is the 30th of November. Now note the winter time change. We remain in the CET, so it will be 14 CET, which I think converts to 13 UTC for the 30th of November. But I mean, get back to the website.